The shuttle's engines hummed with a pitch that made Rena Hayes want to cover her ears. Everything here sounded wrong, felt wrong, even smelled wrong. The air was too clean, too processed, like breathing inside a medical facility. She pressed her forehead against the viewing port and watched Meridian Academy grow larger against the backdrop of Star's 0.3 years of applications. 2 years of waiting. 6 months of preparation. All to get here, to this floating paradise where the galaxy's best and brightest came to learn. And she was about to step into it wearing clothes that felt too heavy and carrying a bag that probably weighed more than half the students on this shuttle. First time off-world. The voice came from her left. Rena turned to see a feline student, all soft fur and enormous eyes, looking at her with obvious nervousness. The creature was barely 4 feet tall, with ears that swiveled independently and hands that had retractable claws currently hidden beneath velvet pads. That obvious? Rena asked, managing a smile. You keep touching things. The walls, the seats, your bag. The feline's whiskers twitched. Most species find human strength concerning. Rena pulled her hand back from the armrest she'd been gripping. There were finger-shaped dents in the material. I'll be more careful. I'm Wissa. We're actually roommates. I checked the housing assignments. Lisa's voice dropped to a whisper. I requested a transfer, but they said it would be good for cultural exchange. The words stung, but Rena kept her expression neutral. She'd expected this. Earth's reputation had preceded humanity's entry into the galactic community by decades. A death world, they called it. A planet where everything was hostile, where the dominant species had clawed its way to the top of a food chain that never stopped trying to drag them back down. I don't bite, Rena said softly. Promise. Lisa didn't look convinced, but she nodded anyway. The shuttle docked with a gentle bump that barely registered to Rena, but sent several smaller students stumbling. She waited until everyone else had departed before standing, knowing that her movements, even controlled and careful, tended to startle people. The corridor beyond was wide and bright, with gravity that felt like walking on a moon. 0.4 standard, according to the information packet. Less than half what she'd grown up with. Rena took one step and nearly bounced into the ceiling. Several students scattered, chirping and clicking an alarm. She grabbed a handrail and forced herself to move slowly, carefully, like she was walking on ice. This is going to take some getting used to. The dormitory was beautiful. Rena had to admit that. Sweeping curves of architecture that seemed to flow rather than stand, colors that shifted based on the ambient light, and windows that offered views of the planet below, a world of endless gardens and peaceful seas. Her room was twice the size of her family's apartment back in Chicago, with furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Lisa was already there, unpacking items from a container that floated beside her. The feeling glanced at Rena, then quickly away. I'll stay on this side, Rena said, gesturing to the right half of the room. You won't even know I'm here. It's fine. Lisa's voice was small. I've heard stories about your world, about your people. Most of them are probably true, Rena admitted. She set her bag down gently, though it still made a thud that seemed too loud. But I'm not here to cause problems. I'm here to learn. Over the next week, Rena discovered just how fragile everything was. Doors that felt like paper, chairs that creaked under her weight, food that tasted like colored air, bland and unsatisfying. She was constantly hungry, constantly tired from holding back her natural strength, constantly aware that she was different in ways that couldn't be hidden. Her classes were fascinating but frustrating. Professors spoke quickly, assuming students could absorb information at rates that seemed impossible. Most species here had better memory than humans, could process data faster, could see or hear or smell things she couldn't. But Rena had something they didn't. She had persistence. She had the ability to function on 4 hours of sleep while they needed 12. She had a body that could heal from injuries that would cripple them. She kept that last part to herself. The trouble started in her second week. Rena was sitting in the back of the quantum mechanics lecture hall, taking notes on a tablet that kept cracking under her fingers when someone kicked her chair. Not hard, just enough to be annoying. She ignored IT happened again. Then again. Rena turned to see a Torgal student smirking at her. He was tall for his species, maybe 5.5 feet, with scales that shimmered green and gold. His friends flanked him, a mixture of species she didn't recognize yet. "You're in my seat, human," he said. His voice was smooth, confident, the voice of someone who'd never been challenged. "The seats aren't assigned," Rena replied quietly. "They are now. Move." Every instinct in Rena's body screamed at her to stand her ground, to meet the challenge, to show this scaled creature what happened when you picked a fight with a human. But she remembered her grandmother's words, spoken the night before she left Earth. "Don't let them see the wolf until they force your hand." Rena gathered her things and moved to another seat. The Torgal laughed, a hissing sound that made several other students join in. That night, Lisa spoke for the first time without fear in her voice. "That was Dravik. His family is important. Council members." "Good for him," Rena said flatly. "He does this every year. Picks someone weak and makes them miserable until they leave." Lisa's ears flattened. "I'm sorry he chose you." Rena smiled without humor. "He didn't choose someone weak. He just doesn't know it yet." 2 weeks felt like 2 years. Rena discovered that patience was harder than any physical challenge Earth had ever thrown at her. At home, problems were direct. A threat showed itself, and you dealt with it. Here, everything was subtle, indirect, wrapped in layers of social rules she barely understood. Dravik and his friends had made her their project. It started small, blocking hallways so she had to squeeze past, their scales scraping against her arms. Taking her seat in every lecture hall, forcing her to stand or sit on the floor. Spreading rumors that humans ate other sentient species, that Earth was a prison planet for the galaxy's most violent criminals, that she was only here because the Council pitted her primitive world. Then it escalated. Her research files vanished from the shared network. 3 days of work gone. She redid it in one night, fingers flying across the keyboard while Lisa slept. The next week, her lab samples were contaminated with a compound that ruined an entire project. She started over, working through meals, ignoring the gnawing hunger that never quite went away on this station's bland food. Professor Halver noticed. The old Quarian moved slowly through the advanced physics lab, his amphibian skin glistening under the lights. He paused at her station, watching her calibrate equipment with hands that never shook despite her exhaustion. "You're redoing the polarization experiment," he observed. His voice was like water over rocks, smooth and ancient. "Equipment malfunction," Rena lied. "Of course." Halvern's eyes, large and knowing, studied her face. "You know, I served in the Border Patrol before I became a teacher. 40 years watching the edge of known space." Rena didn't respond, focused on her work. "We encountered your world once, long before official contact. Our ship detected unusual energy signatures from your moon. We thought perhaps a civilization was hiding there, avoiding detection." He paused. "We were wrong. The signatures were from your planet, from your wars." Rena's hands stilled. "We observed for 3 days. We saw children playing in areas where any other species would have died from heat or cold or simply the gravitational stress. We saw your people argue, fight, hurt each other, then help each other moments later. We saw predators that would have been apex threats on most worlds, and your species hunted them for sport." Halvern's voice softened. "We left without making contact. We weren't ready for what your people represented." "And what's that?" Rena asked quietly. "Survivors. True survivors. Not people who adapted to paradise, but people who made paradise from hell itself." He placed a webbed hand on her shoulder, gentle despite his words. "The question is whether survivors can learn to live in peace, or if peace is something your kind can never truly know." That night, Lisa broke the careful silence that had existed between them. "You work too hard. You never sleep. You barely eat. I'm Euphina." Rena was recalibrating her tablet again, the fourth one this month. Something about her body chemistry made the touch sensors fail faster. "You're not fine. Everyone can see it. Dravik is breaking you, and you're just letting him." Lisa's tail lashed, a sign of agitation Rena had learned to recognize. "Why don't you report him? Tell the administrators? Would they listen?" Rena asked, though she already knew the answer. "Probably not. Most faculty think students should resolve conflicts through dialogue and mutual understanding. Lisa's whiskers drooped. They don't understand that some people don't want understanding. They want dominance. Rena looked at her roommate, really looked at her, and saw something she hadn't expected. Lisa wasn't afraid anymore. She was angry. On your world, what would happen if someone did this? Lisa asked. Depend where you were. In some places, you'd report them and let authorities handle it. In others, you'd handle it yourself. Rena set down the tablet. But either way, there would be consequences. Real ones. Here, there are no consequences for people like Dravik. His family is too powerful. His species is too influential. Lisa curled up on her sleeping platform. I'm sorry you came here. You deserve better than this. The semester dragged on. Rena slept 4 hours a night while her classmates needed 12. She ate double portions that left her hungry while they complained about being too full. She worked through pain that would have sent most species to medical care, her body healing minor injuries overnight that would take them weeks to recover from. Dravik grew frustrated. His harassment wasn't working the way it usually did. Most students he targeted broke down, crying within days. Some left the academy entirely. But Rena just kept going, kept working, kept showing up with those calm eyes that never quite showed what she was thinking. That he started making mistakes. Got sloppy. Shoved her in the hallway once. Not hard by human standards, barely enough to make her step sideways. But several students saw it. Witnesses meant risk, even for someone with his family's influence. One evening, as Rena was walking back from the library, she found her path blocked. Dravik and 4 friends, all large for their species, all looking confident. The corridor was empty. Most students were at the gymnasium watching low-gravity sports that Rena found boring and pointless. You should leave, Dravik said without preamble. This academy isn't for your kind. You don't belong here. I was accepted. Same as you. Rena kept her voice level, her posture relaxed. Everything her grandmother taught her about predators. Don't show fear. Don't show aggression. Just be. Your test scores don't matter. Your scholarship doesn't matter. You're a charity case from a backwards planet, and everyone knows it. He stepped closer. Leave, or we'll make you leave. Rena felt something shift inside her. Not anger, not yet, but a recognition, an understanding that this moment had been coming since the day she arrived. All the patience, all the restraint, all the careful control was about to be tested. Are you threatening me? She asked quietly. I'm promising you. Dravik's claws extended slightly. This is your last chance to walk away with dignity. Rena looked at each of them in turn. Young, privileged, confident in their superiority. They had no idea, no concept of what they were doing. To them, this was a game. A way to prove dominance in a society that had forgotten what real dominance looked like. One question, Rena said. Are you sure you want to do this? Dravik smiled, showing rows of small sharp teeth. Absolutely. Okay then. Rena's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. Something old and tired and very, very patient. Just remember, you started this. The corridor felt smaller suddenly. Rena watched Dravik's friends spread out, attempting to surround her in a formation that probably seemed intimidating to them. She'd seen pack behavior before, studied it in wolves back home, understood the psychology of group aggression. These students were mimicking something their species had never truly needed to perfect. Last chance, Dravik repeated, his confidence growing with each passing second of her stillness. Rena let out a slow breath. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, words spoken over a kitchen table scarred by 3 generations of use. The wolf doesn't announce itself. It simply is, and when cornered, it reminds the world why fear exists. Dravik moved first. He grabbed her shoulder, claws extending just enough to be threatening without breaking skin. His grip was firm by his standards, meant to hurt, meant to intimidate. He began to twist her arm, a submission technique his species used to establish dominance. Rena didn't move, didn't flinch. The pressure that should have brought her to her knees barely registered. She could feel the confusion in his grip as he applied more force. Then more, his scales shifting color slightly with the exertion. What? He started to say. She moved. Not fast by human standards, but fast enough. Her free hand came up and caught his wrist, thumb pressing into a pressure point she'd learned in mandatory self-defense courses back home. Dravik's grip released involuntarily, his body's own nervous system betraying him. She stepped inside his reach, used his own momentum against him, and suddenly he was on the ground, face down, arm locked behind his back in a position that was uncomfortable but not damaging. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds. His friends froze, tried to process what they just witnessed. Then they rushed forward, more from panic than strategy. Rena moved like water. Deflect, redirect, control. She caught the first student, a Kelvin with 4 arms, and used his own limbs to tangle him up, setting him gently on the floor in a confused heap. The second, a female Torgal smaller than Dravik, received a grip on her collar that lifted her briefly off the ground before Rena set her down and swept her legs out from under her, dropping her onto her back with enough force to knock the wind out, but nothing more. The third and fourth students stumbled over each other trying to retreat, their courage evaporating. Rena caught them both, one hand on each, and simply held them in place. They struggled, pulling with all their strength, and couldn't budge her fingers even a fraction. The whole thing lasted maybe 10 seconds. 5 students, all bigger than average for their species, all on the ground or immobilized. Rena wasn't even breathing hard. She hadn't thrown a punch, hadn't struck anyone, had simply demonstrated a truth they'd never encountered before. Some species weren't built for peace because peace was all they'd ever known. And some species knew peace because they'd learned to be very, very good at war. "I didn't hurt any of you," Rena said calmly, still holding the 2 students who dangled from her grip like children. "I could have. On Earth, if 5 people attacked one person, that person would have the right to defend themselves with real force. But I didn't. I just made sure nobody got hurt." Dravik struggled against the hold, his face pressed against the floor. "Let me go." "When you calm down." Rena's voice remained level. "When you all calm down and we can talk like civilized people." That's when Lisa came running around the corner, her fur standing on end, eyes wide with panic. She skidded to a halt, taking in the scene. 5 students on the ground. Rena standing calmly in the center. No visible injuries on anyone. "What did you do?" Lisa whispered. "They attacked me. I defended myself." Rena released the 2 she'd been holding. They scrambled backward, joining their friends in a confused huddle. "I didn't hurt them." "Check." Lisa approached cautiously, examining each student. No blood, no broken bones, just bruised pride and shocked expressions. "How is this possible?" "Because I'm from Earth," Rena said simply. "And on Earth, this is what restraint looks like." Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Security, drawn by the commotion or perhaps alerted by an automated system. 2 officers arrived, both Quarians like Professor Halvern, moving with the slow deliberation of their species. They looked at the scene, at the students on the ground, at Rena standing with her hands visible and empty. "Explain," the first officer demanded, his voice carrying authority despite its gentle tone. Everyone started talking at once. Accusations, defenses, confusion. The security officers raised their hands for silence. One at a time. "You first." The officer pointed at Dravik. Dravik's story painted Rena as an aggressor, a violent human who attacked without provocation. His friends nodded along, embellishing details, trying to reshape reality into something that made sense to them. Then it was Rena's turn. She kept it simple, factual, pointing out the witness who'd been hiding at the corridor's end. A small Phelan student, trembling but honest, who corroborated her version. 5 students surrounding one. Threats made. First contact initiated by Dravik. The security officers looked uncomfortable. Their species had evolved past physical confrontation millennia ago. Violence was something they studied in history courses, not something they knew how to handle in real time. "Come with us," the first officer finally said. "All of you." As they walked toward the security office, Lisa fell into step beside Rena. "You're going to be expelled," she whispered. "They'll say you're dangerous." "Maybe," Rena acknowledged. "But I'm not dangerous. I'm just competent. What's the difference?" Rena smiled sadly. "Dangerous means you want to hurt people. Competent means you can hurt people, but choose not to. They need to learn the difference. The security office was small, designed for processing minor disputes over borrowed items or scheduling conflicts. The officers clearly had no protocol for this. They separated everyone into different rooms, took statements, reviewed security footage that showed the incident from 3 angles. Professor Halvern arrived an hour later. He dismissed the security officers with a gesture that spoke of authority they didn't question. Then he had everyone except Rena leave the room. "Show me your hands," he said. Rena held them out. "Steady, unmarked, no swelling or bruising. You controlled 5 students without injuring any of them." It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." "How?" "Training, experience, and knowing exactly how much force not to use." Rena met his gaze. "On Earth, what I did would be considered the minimum response to being attacked. Here, I'm guessing it's considered excessive." Halvern was quiet for a long moment, his large eyes studying her with an intensity that felt like being examined under a microscope. "Do you know why we were afraid of your world? Because we're violent." "No, because you understand violence in ways we've forgotten. Because you can measure it, control it, deploy it with precision." He gestured at the door. "Those students attacked you with fear disguised as aggression. You responded with competence disguised as mercy. The gap between those two things is what makes your species terrifying." The tribunal convened 3 days later in a chamber that felt more like a theater than a courtroom. Curved walls rose toward a domed ceiling painted with constellations from 100 different homeworlds. 7 administrators sat in elevated seats, representing the major species that funded Meridian Academy. Rena stood alone in the center, a spotlight making her feel exposed in ways that combat never had. Dravik sat with his father in the observer section. The elder Torgal was larger than his son, scales darker and etched with patterns that spoke of age and authority. Council member Thask had arrived on a private transport, bringing with him an expectation that this matter would be resolved in his family's favor. Professor Halvern sat off to one side, called as a witness but also present as the closest thing Rena had to an advocate. Lisa was there too, her small form barely visible in the back row, but her presence meant more than Rena had expected. "Rena Hayes, human, student identification 77429, the central administrator began. She was a Quarian female, her skin a pale blue that marked her as coming from the northern waters of her homeworld. "You stand accused of assault against 5 fellow students. How do you answer?" "Not guilty of assault," Rena said clearly. "Guilty of self-defense." Murmurs rippled through the observers. Self-defense wasn't a common concept here. Most species had evolved past the need for it, developing social structures where violence was unthinkable, conflicts resolved through communication and consensus. "Explain the distinction," another administrator said. This one was Kelvin, his 4 arms folded in a gesture Rena had learned meant skepticism. "They surrounded me. They threatened me. One of them grabbed me and attempted to cause pain through joint manipulation. I responded by restraining them until they were no longer a threat. I didn't strike anyone. I didn't cause injury. I simply made sure nobody got hurt, including me. By your own admission, you overpowered 5 students simultaneously." The Kelvin's voice carried disbelief. "That level of force exceeds any reasonable definition of defense. On Earth, it would be considered minimal force." Rena kept her voice steady, professional. "If 5 people attacked 1 person on my world, that person would have the legal and moral right to respond with enough force to protect themselves. What I did was restrain them. I could have done much more. Is that a threat?" Council member Thask's voice boomed from the observer section, protocol forgotten in his anger. "No, sir. It's an explanation. You invited humans to join the galactic community. You accepted me into this academy. But you never asked what that meant. You never considered what it takes to survive on a world like Earth." The central administrator raised a hand for silence. "Perhaps you should explain. Tell us about Earth." Rena took a breath, organizing thoughts she'd never had to articulate before. "Earth has gravity twice what this station maintains. Most species here would be crushed by their own weight on my homeworld. Our atmosphere contains oxygen at levels that would be toxic to many of you. Our temperature swings would kill most species in hours. We have storms that level cities, earthquakes that reshape continents, and diseases that evolve faster than we can cure them. She paused, seeing the discomfort on their faces. But that's just the environment. And there are the other species. We share Earth with predators that can tear us apart, parasites that eat us from inside, and plants that can poison us with a touch. We're not the strongest species on our planet. We're not the fastest. We don't have claws or venom or natural armor. Then how did you survive? The Quarian administrator asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. We learned. We adapted. We turned our weakness into strength. We can't outrun a predator, so we learned to outlast it. We can't overpower most threats, so we learned to outsmart them. And when we had no choice, we learned to fight with a precision that made up for our physical limitations. Rena looked at each administrator in turn. Every human child learns self-defense. Not because we're violent, but because our world demands it. The alternative is death. Professor Halvern stood, his movement drawing attention. May I speak? The central administrator nodded. 40 years ago, I was part of a border patrol that encountered Earth. We observed without making contact. We saw a species that had achieved spaceflight while still fighting wars on their own planet. We saw children playing in environments that would be classified as extreme hazard zones. We saw a level of casual violence that horrified us. He turned to look at Rena. We also saw something else. We saw humans stop fighting to help an injured enemy. We saw them risk their lives to save other species, even predators that had just attacked them. We saw the capacity for both violence and compassion that existed in the same moment in the same individuals. The chamber was silent. The question before this tribunal isn't whether Rena Hayes is capable of violence. She clearly is. Every human is. The question is whether she chooses violence or chooses control. Halvern gestured at the footage playing on screens around the chamber, showing the corridor incident from multiple angles. Watch carefully. She doesn't strike first. She doesn't strike at all. She restrains. She controls. She demonstrates a level of measured response that took my species thousands of years to develop, and she does it instinctively. It's still force, the Kelvin administrator argued. Force has no place in a civilized society. Respectfully, administrator, you're wrong. Rena surprised herself with her boldness. Force always has a place. The question is who controls it and how it's used. You've built a civilization where force seems unnecessary because you've never needed it. You evolved on worlds where cooperation was easy, where resources were abundant, where the biggest threat was weather that could be predicted and avoided. She stepped forward, knowing she was risking everything but unable to stop. But what happens when you meet a species that didn't have those advantages? What happens when someone like Dravik decides to use force because he's never faced consequences? You don't have answers because you've never had to ask the questions. Council member Thask stood, his bulk impressive even among the large species present. My son made a mistake, but your response was disproportionate. You could have reported him. You could have sought help from faculty. Would they have helped? Rena asked directly. How many students has your son driven from this academy? How many complaints have been filed and ignored because of your family's influence? The silence that followed was answer enough. Lisa stood suddenly, her small voice carrying in the quiet chamber. I want to testify. The administrators looked surprised, but gestured for her to approach. Lisa walked to stand beside Rena, her fur still betraying nervousness, but her voice steady. I was afraid of Rena when she arrived. Everyone told me humans were dangerous, violent, unpredictable. I requested a room transfer. Lisa's ears flattened with shame, but I was denied, so I watched her. For 2 weeks, I watched Dravik and his friends harass her. They deleted her work. They contaminated her experiments. They spread lies about her, and she never responded. She just kept working, kept being patient, kept treating everyone with respect. Lisa turned to look at Dravik. You did everything you could to break her, and when that didn't work, you attacked her. Not with words, with violence. You started it, and she finished it without hurting any of you. If she were really dangerous, you'd all be in medical care right now. Instead, the only thing bruised was your pride. The Quarian administrator leaned forward. What would you have us do, Rena Hayes? How should we handle a species that brings violence into a peaceful society? Don't call it violence, Rena said quietly. Call it what it is. Capability. Competence. The ability to protect yourself and others when communication fails. You can't uninvent force just because you've forgotten how to use it. You can only choose who wields it and why. She stood straighter, meeting their gazes without flinching. I don't want special treatment. I don't want to be feared. I just want the same respect you'd give any other student who defended themselves. If that's not possible here, then maybe Professor Halvern was right 40 years ago. Maybe the galaxy isn't ready for what humanity represents. The tribunal deliberated for 6 hours. Rena sat in a waiting room with walls that shifted colors based on ambient mood, cycling through nervous yellows and uncertain grays. Lisa stayed with her despite being told she could leave. Professor Halvern brought them something that resembled tea, but tasted like warm plant water. What do you think they'll decide? Lisa asked, her tail wrapped tight around her legs. Expulsion, probably. Rena stared at her hands, the same hands that had controlled 5 students without leaving a mark. They can't let me stay. It sets a precedent they're not comfortable with. That's not fair. You were defending yourself. Fair doesn't matter. What matters is that I reminded them of something they've tried to forget. That not everyone in the galaxy evolved in paradise. Rena managed a tired smile. It's okay. I knew this was a long shot from the beginning. The door opened. A Quarian attendant gestured for them to return to the chamber. The walk back felt longer than it had the first time. Each step weighted with the knowledge that her galactic education was probably ending before it truly began. The 7 administrators looked tired, their expressions harder to read than before. The central Quarian cleared her throat, a wet sound that echoed in the silent chamber. Rena Hayes, this tribunal has reviewed all evidence, heard all testimony, and deliberated extensively on the matter before us. She paused, and Rena braced herself. We find you not guilty of assault. Rena blinked. She'd been so certain of the opposite outcome that the words took a moment to register. However, the administrator continued, and there it was, the other shoe dropping. We cannot ignore that your actions, while technically defensive, demonstrated a capacity for force that concerns us. Therefore, you are hereby placed on academic probation. Any further incidents involving physical contact of any kind will result in immediate expulsion. That's ridiculous. Lisa's voice rang out before she could stop herself. You're punishing her for being attacked. We are establishing boundaries appropriate for this community, the Kelvin administrator said firmly. Rena Hayes must understand that Earth standards do not apply here. Force, even in defense, must be a last resort, not a first response. It was a last resort, Professor Halvern said quietly. She endured weeks of harassment before responding. What more restraint do you expect? That brings us to the second matter. The central administrator turned to where Dravik and his father sat. Dravik Thask, you and your associates are found guilty of harassment and assault. You are suspended for 1 semester and required to complete mediation training before returning. Council member Thask stood, his scales darkening with rage. My son is suspended while the human walks free? This is an outrage. Your son initiated violence, the administrator said coldly. The security footage is unambiguous. He grabbed Rena Hayes with intent to harm. That she was not harmed speaks to her restraint, not his mercy. She's a human, from a Deathworld. She doesn't belong here. She was accepted through the same process as every other student. Her test scores were exceptional. Her entrance essays demonstrated insight and perspective we found valuable. The Quarian's voice took on an edge Rena hadn't heard before. What doesn't belong here, council member, is the attitude that some species are inherently superior to others. We invited humanity to join us. We don't get to regret that choice simply because they make us uncomfortable. Thask opened his mouth, closed it, then turned and stormed from the chamber. Dravik followed, his head lowered in shame or anger or both. The administrator returned her attention to Rena. You asked us what we should do with a species that brings violence into a peaceful society. Here is our answer. We learn from each other. You will teach a voluntary self-defense course, helping other species understand basic protection techniques. In return, you will attend counseling sessions focused on understanding our cultural norms around conflict resolution. You want me to teach other students to fight. Rena couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. We want you to teach them to protect themselves. There's a difference, as you've demonstrated. The administrator's expression softened slightly. Professor Halvern was right. We've forgotten that force exists because we've been fortunate enough not to need it. But the galaxy is large, and not everything in it is peaceful. Perhaps it's time we remembered that capability and choice are not the same thing. The session ended with formal words and official recordings. Rena walked out in a daze, Lisa chattering excitedly beside her, Professor Halvern following at his measured pace. That went better than expected, Halvern said once they were in the corridor. They put me on probation. They could have expelled you. Instead, they gave you a platform. Halvern's eyes gleamed with something that might have been satisfaction. You wanted respect. You got responsibility instead. Sometimes that's better. The next week was strange. Students gave Rena space, but the quality of that space had changed. Before, they'd avoided her out of fear or prejudice. Now they watched with curiosity, sometimes approaching with careful questions. Is it true you can break bones with your hands? A Phelan student asked in the cafeteria. I could, but I wouldn't. That's the point. Rena tried to explain the concept of controlled force, seeing understanding bloom slowly. Her first self-defense class had 3 students. The second had 7. By the 4th week, she had to request a larger room to accommodate 15 students from 8 different species, all wanting to learn what it meant to protect themselves. Rena started with basics. How to stand, how to move, how to break a grip without hurting the person gripping you. She demonstrated on volunteers, moving with exaggerated slowness, explaining every principle behind every technique. On Earth, we have a saying, she told the class. Walk softly but carry a big stick. It means project peace but maintain capability. You don't have to use force to benefit from knowing how to use it. Lisa became her assistant, translating concepts into terms different species could understand. The small Phelan had overcome her fear entirely, now demonstrating techniques on Rena herself, showing how someone tiny could escape someone larger through leverage and timing rather than strength. Professor Halvern attended every class, sitting in the back, watching with those ancient eyes. After the 3rd session, he approached Rena with a proposal. I'm writing a paper on human integration into galactic society. I like your perspective. He handed her a datapad. These are preliminary observations. Tell me where I'm wrong. Rena read through his notes, seeing her own experiences reflected through an academic lens. You're not wrong, but you're missing something. What? We're not that different. Humans, I mean, from other species. She gestured at the empty training room. Everyone thinks we're special because we're from a death world. But every species has advantages. Quarians have enhanced pattern recognition. Kelvins have 4 arms and can multitask better than any human. Phelans have senses we can barely imagine. My point is that Earth made us good at survival. But survival isn't the same as superiority. We're just specialized in a different direction. Rena handed back the datapad. If you want to understand human integration, don't focus on what makes us dangerous. Focus on what we can learn from each other. Halvern's expression shifted into what might have been a smile. You're wise for someone so young. Not wise, just experienced. There's a difference. That night, Rena found Dravik waiting outside her dormitory. He stood alone, his scales muted in the dim corridor lighting. She stopped, keeping distance between them, every instinct alert. I'm not here to cause trouble, he said quickly. His voice lacked the confidence it had carried before. I came to apologize. Okay, that's it. Just okay. What do you want me to say? Rena studied him, seeing past the scales to the young student underneath. You attacked me. I defended myself. You got suspended. It's done. It's not done. Not for me. Dravik's claws extended and retracted nervously. My father wants me to hate you. Says you humiliated our family. But I can't stop thinking about how you didn't hurt us. You could have. I felt how strong you are. But you just held us down until we stopped struggling. That's called restraint. On my world, we don't have a word for that. Not really. He looked at his hands. We don't need one. Nobody fights. Nobody has to hold back because nobody pushes forward in the first place. Rena understood then. You didn't know what you were doing. I knew I was being cruel. I didn't know I was being dangerous. Dravik met her eyes. What's the difference? Cruelty is emotional. It's about causing pain because it makes you feel powerful. Danger is physical. It's about creating situations where people can actually get hurt. Rena thought about how to explain it. You were being cruel, but when you grabbed me, when your friends surrounded me, you became dangerous. And you didn't even realize it. I am sorry. I know. Apology accepted. She started to move past him, then paused. Dravik, when you come back from suspension, if you want to understand why humans are the way we are, come to one of my classes. Why would I do that? Because you'll learn that being able to hurt someone and choosing not to is more powerful than never being able to hurt them in the first place. She smiled slightly. It's a very human concept. Maybe it's time the galaxy learned it too. 3 months passed like water flowing downhill, inevitable and surprisingly smooth. Rena's self-defense classes became the most popular elective at Meridian Academy. 20 students became 30, then 40. She had to split into multiple sessions, teaching the same techniques to different groups while Lisa managed scheduling and answered questions from species whose physiology Rena was still learning. The training room became a strange kind of sanctuary. Here, species that had never considered violence learned to understand it. Not to use it, Rena emphasized constantly, but to recognize it, avoid it, and if absolutely necessary, survive it. She taught felines how their flexibility could help them escape holds. She showed Quarians how their center of gravity made them surprisingly stable. She demonstrated to Kelvins how 4 arms were an advantage if you knew how to use them defensively. But more than techniques, she taught philosophy. The difference between strength and power. The gap between capability and action. The understanding that peace wasn't the absence of conflict, but the choice to resolve conflict without harm. My grandmother told me something before I left Earth, Rena said during one session, holding a feline student in a gentle restraint that demonstrated the principle without causing discomfort. She said that humans learn to be peaceful because we learn to be dangerous first. You can't choose mercy if you don't understand the alternative. A Kelvin student raised one of his 4 hands. But doesn't that make you barbaric? Maybe. Or maybe it makes us realistic. Rena released the feline, helping her to her feet. Your species evolved where cooperation was natural. Ours evolved where cooperation was necessary for survival against everything else trying to kill us. Neither path is better. They're just different. Professor Halvern published his paper on human integration. It became required reading in 3 departments, sparking debates that continued long after classes ended. Some faculty argued that humans represented a dangerous regression, bringing violence back into a society that had evolved past it. Others countered that humans represented a necessary reminder that peace was a choice, not an inevitability. Rena avoided most of the controversy. She focused on her classes, her training sessions, and slowly building friendships with students who saw past the Deathworld reputation to the person underneath. Lisa remained her closest friend, the small feline now comfortable enough to joke about their first terrified meeting. I asked for a room transfer, Lisa admitted one evening as they studied together. Can you believe that? I was scared of you because you were human. You weren't wrong to be cautious, Rena said, working through a quantum mechanics problem that would have been impossible without the Academy's advanced teaching methods. Humans are dangerous. We just prefer not to be. That's what makes you not dangerous. The preference. Lisa's tail swished thoughtfully. Dravik is coming back next week. Did you hear? Rena had heard. The suspension was ending, mediation training complete. She'd received a formal message from Council Member Thask's office, stiffly worded but containing what might have been an apology buried in diplomatic language. His son had learned valuable lessons. The family hoped this incident could be considered closed. They requested no further action or discussion. I hope he learned something, Rena said simply. Dravik returned on a Tuesday, walking through the academy's main concourse with his scales muted, his posture submissive. Students who had once deferred to him now watched with cool assessment. His friends from the incident had scattered, finding new social groups that didn't include him. That he came to Rena's training session that evening. Stood at the back, watching without speaking, his large eyes taking in everything. When class ended and other students filtered out, he remained. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said without preamble. "But I want you to know I understand now. What I did, what it meant. Tell me." Rena sat on a training mat, gesturing for him to join her. After a moment's hesitation, he did. "The mediation sessions made me research Earth. Really research it. Not just read the propaganda my father showed me." Dravik's voice was quiet, almost ashamed. "I watched documentaries about your predators. Creatures that kill for food. I saw footage of your storms, your earthquakes, your diseases. And then I saw how your species responds." He looked at his clawed hands. "You run into burning buildings to save strangers. You throw yourselves in front of vehicles to protect children. You donate organs to people you've never met. You're capable of incredible violence, but you use that capability for protection instead of domination. Not all humans," Rena corrected gently. "We have people who use violence for terrible things. We're not perfect, but you understand the choice. That's what I didn't get before." Dravik met her eyes. "When I grabbed you, I thought I was establishing dominance. On my world, that's how social order works. You display superiority and others defer. Nobody gets hurt because nobody actually fights. And on Earth, if you establish dominance, you'd better be ready to maintain it. Because someone will always test you. Someone will always push back." He let out a breath that might have been a laugh. "I tested you, and you showed me exactly how outmatched I was. But you did it without hurting me. That's what I don't understand. Why didn't you hurt us?" "Because hurting you wouldn't have solved anything," Rena said. "It would have just proven that humans are as dangerous as everyone fears. Controlling you without hurting you proved something different." "What?" "That we can be trusted with power because we choose not to use it." Dravik was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, offering a hand in the human gesture he'd learned. "Teach me, please. I want to understand." Rena took his hand, noting the careful control in his grip, the awareness that hadn't been there before. "First lesson is free. After that, you have to register like everyone else." The semester ended with evaluations and examinations. Rena's academic scores remained exceptional, her practical demonstrations even more so. The probation status was reviewed and quietly lifted. Several faculty members who had initially opposed her presence now recommended her for advanced programs. Professor Halvern called her to his office on the last day before break. The space was cluttered with artifact from a dozen worlds, mementos of a life spent exploring the galaxy's edges. "I have a question for you," he said, pouring 2 cups of the plant water tea he seemed to prefer. "What do you want to do after graduation?" Rena had thought about this. Late at night, when the station's artificial day-night cycle tried to convince her body it was time to sleep. "I want to help. With integration, I mean. There are more humans coming into galactic society every year. They're going to face the same problems I did. Maybe I can make it easier for them." "Easier how?" "By teaching both sides. Teaching humans how to operate in a peaceful society. Teaching other species how to work with humans." She accepted the tea, sipping carefully. "We're not going away. Humanity is part of the galaxy now. We can either keep being seen as dangerous outsiders, or we can become partners who happen to be specialized in survival." Halvern's expression shifted into satisfaction. "I was hoping you'd say something like that. I've been asked to establish a new program. Cross-species integration studies. It needs someone who understands both sides, who can bridge the gap between Deathworld perspective and peaceful society expectations. You want me to help run a program? I'm still a student. You're a student who taught 40 other students how to understand force without fearing it. You're a student who turned an assault charge into an educational opportunity. You're a student who made the faculty confront their own prejudices and assumptions." Halvern smiled, showing teeth that were meant for tearing vegetation. "You're exactly what this program needs." The offer hung between them, rich with possibility and challenge. Rena thought about her grandmother, about the kitchen table conversations, and the lessons in controlling strength, about walking softly but carrying a big stick, about choosing mercy because you understood the alternative. I'll do it, she said, on one condition. Name it. Dravik joins the program too, and others like him, people who made mistakes but learned from them. Rena set down her tea. If we're going to bridge gaps, we need people on both sides who understand what the gap looks like from the middle. Halvar nodded slowly. Agreed. The station's artificial sunset painted the viewport in colors that Earth's sun never quite managed. Rena stood in her dormitory, packing items that had accumulated over the semester. Lisa was doing the same, chattering about plans to visit her homeworld during break. Will you come back? Lisa asked suddenly. Next semester, I mean. Now that you're not on probation, you could transfer somewhere else. Somewhere that doesn't have history. This is where the history happened. That makes it important. Rena smiled at her friend. Besides, I made a promise to teach. And humans keep their promises. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. That's what makes them worth keeping. A chime at the door announced a visitor. Rena opened it to find a young human woman standing nervously in the corridor. She looked lost, overwhelmed, holding a bag that seemed too heavy and wearing clothes that seemed too light. Are you Rena Hayes? The woman asked. Her accent marked her as coming from somewhere in South Asia, the vowels shaped differently than Rena's Midwestern American patterns. I am. Can I help you? My name is Priya. I just arrived. First human student this semester. She looked around the dormitory corridor like it might break under her weight. Someone at registration said you could help me. Tell me how to fit in here. Rena saw herself 6 months ago, standing in this same corridor, feeling the same overwhelming strangeness. She stepped back, opening the door wider. Come. First thing you need to know is that everything here is more fragile than you expect. Second thing is that everyone here is more fragile than you expect. But third thing, most important thing, she smiled at the nervous young woman. They don't know what surviving really means. And that's not a weakness. It's just different. Your job is to show them that different doesn't mean dangerous. Priya entered cautiously, setting her bag down with exaggerated care. Is it true you fought 5 students and won? I didn't fight them. I stopped them from fighting me. There's a difference. Lesson 1. On Earth, strength is about what you can do. Here, strength is about what you choose not to do. Learn that, and you'll be fine. Lisa poked her head around from her side of the room. Lesson 2. Humans make excellent roommates once you get over the initial terror. I'm Wissa. Don't worry. The fear only lasts a few weeks. Priya laughed, a sound of relief that filled the space. I was so scared. Everyone back home told me stories about students who couldn't adapt, who got expelled or gave up. Some do, Rena admitted. But some of us stick around. Some of us decide that being from a death world means we're good at surviving anywhere, even in paradise. She looked out the viewport at the station, at the ships coming and going, at the vast galaxy spread out beyond. Earth made us tough. But being here, this makes us something else. Something new. What's that? Bridges. Rena turned back to Priya, to Lisa, to this strange sanctuary they'd built together. We're bridges between worlds that never thought they'd need connecting. And bridges are built to be strong. It's what we're good at. Outside, the artificial sunset faded into artificial night. Ships arrived, carrying students from 100 worlds, each bringing their own strengths and weaknesses, their own perspectives and prejudices. Among them were 3 more humans, nervous and hopeful, carrying Earth with them in their bones and their hearts. Rena Hayes smiled, thinking about the year ahead, about the classes she would teach and the lessons she would learn, about showing the galaxy that Deathworlders could be gentle without being weak, that strength was a choice before it was a capability, that the wolf could walk among sheep without anyone needing to be afraid. Because she'd learned the most important lesson Earth had to teach. Survival wasn't about being the strongest or the fastest or the most dangerous. It was about adapting. And humans, forged in fire and stone and endless struggle, were very good at adapting indeed.